People walk past hunger every day without seeing it. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive with sirens or speeches, but with two small hands refusing to let go. And sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the spark that changes everything. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Maple Street as Emma and Olivia walked home from school, their identical backpacks bouncing in rhythm with each step. They were 7 years old, twins down to the tiny freckle beneath their left eyes, though anyone who knew them well could tell them apart instantly. Emma walked with her chin lifted, eyes always forward, alert to the world. Olivia kept her gaze lowered, counting the cracks in the sidewalk beneath her shoes. 12, 13, 14, she murmured. You're going to trip if you keep doing that, Emma said. I never trip, Olivia replied. You tripped yesterday. That was different. 20 feet behind them, Marcus followed at an unhurried pace. Jeans, polo shirt, an earpiece barely visible. He wasn't dressed like a bodyguard from a movie, and that was intentional. For 3 years he'd been part of their lives, close enough to protect, distant enough to disappear. The girls barely noticed him anymore, which meant he was doing his job perfectly. The elementary school sat at the end of Maple Street, brick walls faded, playground equipment worn by generations of children. As they neared the gate, Emma's attention snagged on a man standing near the pickup area. Mid-40s, maybe, jacket washed thin, jeans patched at one knee. He stood straighter than he needed to, shoulders back, watching the children spill out of the building. That's Dylan's dad, Olivia whispered. Emma knew Dylan. Everyone did. The boy who shoved kids in the hallway. The boy who laughed when someone cried. She'd seen him trip a smaller kid just last week and walk away like it meant nothing. The man's face shifted when Dylan emerged from the school doors. Dylan was 9, tall for his age, with the same guarded hardness in his eyes. He walked toward his father without looking up. Hey, bud, the man said, voice warm, hopeful. How was your day? Fine. You hungry? I thought maybe we could. I said fine. Dylan brushed past him. The hope drained from the man's face, replaced by something raw and painful. He took 3 steps after his son before his legs buckled. There was no cry, no drama. He simply folded, catching himself on one hand, breath coming fast and shallow. Emma moved before she realized she'd decided to. Mister. Her backpack hit the pavement behind her. Mister, are you okay? Olivia was right there too, always just a step behind her sister. Marcus straightened, already speaking quietly into his earpiece. The man tried to push himself up, sweat shining on his forehead despite the cool October air. I'm fine, just stood up too fast. You're not fine, Emma said, kneeling beside him like she belonged there. When did you eat last? The question startled him. His eyes met hers, and something flickered there, something like shame. I'm okay, sweetheart. You don't need to. Yesterday, he whispered, after Olivia spoke softly but firmly. Yesterday morning, Dylan had stopped nearby, frozen, watching. His face held too many emotions for a 9-year-old. Embarrassment, anger, fear tangled together. Come on, Emma said, slipping an arm under the man's. There's a diner 2 blocks that way. No, I can't. Yes, you can. Olivia took his other arm. They were small, barely 70 pounds between them, but they pulled with fierce determination. The man let them help him stand. Dylan turned and ran. The pain on the man's face had nothing to do with hunger, but the girls didn't notice. They were already talking about soup and sandwiches, about Mrs. Chen's diner, about how he needed to eat right now. Marcus followed at a distance, letting it happen, making sure it stayed safe. The man's name was Richard Torres. Construction worker when work existed. The site had shut down for permits. He'd missed days. His bus pass money had gone to rent. He'd made sure Dylan ate. Always Dylan first. Mrs. Chen took one look at him and pointed to a booth. No questions. Soup and the big sandwich, Emma ordered. And pie. You need pie, too. Richard's hands shook as he ate, color slowly returning to his face. Outside, the October light softened the world. Inside that diner, 2 children learned how close kindness lived to courage. Later, at home, Robert Winters listened as his daughters told the story all at once, voices overlapping, details tumbling out. He didn't interrupt. When they finished, he leaned back, eyes shining. "Your mother would have done the same thing," he said quietly. "Are you proud?" Emma asked. "More than I can say." He told them about a winter night years ago, about a coat given away in the snow, about a lesson that had never left him. Money only matters if you use it when it matters. Days later, at the parent meeting, Richard arrived in his best wrinkled shirt. Dylan saw him and snapped, words sharp enough to draw blood. The room went silent as anger spilled out, accusations and shame laid bare. Richard absorbed it all, standing there, trying not to break. Robert crossed the room and sat beside him. "You showed up," Robert said. "That matters." And then Emma stood. Small voice, steady truth. She told them what they'd seen. What hunger looked like. What sacrifice looked like. She showed them the photo. She told them who Richard really was. One by one, parents stood, offering help, jobs, cleats, connections. The air shifted. Richard wasn't invisible anymore. When the meeting ended, Richard knelt in front of the girls, eyes wet. "You saw me," he said. "Really saw me. And you decided I mattered." That night, the world felt lighter. None of them knew how fragile that light was. Dylan came back to school the following Monday, and Emma noticed the difference immediately. He stood by his locker longer than usual, staring at the metal door as if it held answers. The boys who used to crowd around him weren't there. When Sophie Chen dropped her tray in the cafeteria and laughter rippled outward, Emma braced herself for Dylan's voice to cut through it. Instead, he stood, walked over, and knelt beside Sophie, helping gather spilled food without a word. It was small, quiet, but it mattered. Over the next days, the changes came in fragments. Doors held open, mean comments swallowed before they escaped. Silence where cruelty used to live. He ate alone more often, and when Emma asked if he was okay, he looked at her with eyes that seemed older now. "I'm trying," he said. "Trying to be better." At home, the girls told their father everything. "People can change," Robert said. "Especially when they see the cost of staying the same." 3 weeks later, Richard Torres rang their doorbell. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, clutching an envelope. He had full-time work now. Benefits. A steady paycheck. Dylan had soccer cleats for 3 seasons. "I wanted you to know it mattered," Richard said. "What you did. All of it." He handed the envelope back. $25. Interest included. The girls accepted it with solemn nods and tucked it into their pink wallet. They thought the story was finished. They were wrong. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Richard had collapsed at work. County General. He was asking for the girls. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Richard lay pale beneath thin blankets, Dylan sitting rigid beside him. "They found a mass," Richard said softly. "Pancreas." Dylan already knew what that meant. The tests took days. The truth arrived anyway. That night, Dylan called Emma from his dark apartment. "They said I need to come now. I don't have a ride. I'm scared." Robert didn't hesitate. 90 seconds later they were in the car. The ICU was quiet, machines humming steadily. "Doctor." Chen spoke carefully, gently. "Aggressive. Spread. Hours or days." Dylan stood at his father's side, words pouring out in apology and grief. Richard stopped him. "Promise me you'll be kind," he whispered. "Promise me you'll help when you can. Promise me you'll show up." Dylan promised through tears. Richard's gaze found Emma and Olivia. "Take care of him," he asked. "We will," Olivia said without hesitation. At 2:17 a.m., Richard Torres died. Dylan screamed. The girls held him. Robert held them all. The funeral was small. Emma stood and spoke when no one else would. She told the truth again. About hunger. About dignity. About being seen. Dylan packed his life into 3 boxes. Robert took him home. Emergency guardianship. Lawyers. Resources. Money used when it mattered. That first night, Dylan sat in the guest room, funeral suit still on. "I don't deserve this," he said. "You don't decide what you deserve," Emma told him. "You decide what you do next." Months passed. Custody became adoption. Anger softened into grief. Grief turned into purpose. Years later, Dylan stood outside the same school, watching children spill into the afternoon sun. He saw a tired man standing alone and walked over. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Want some coffee?" Because once, someone had done the same for him. And it mattered. At the Winters home, Emma packed for medical school. Olivia studied law. Robert funded a scholarship bearing Richard Torres' name. On a quiet October night, the world wasn't fair. But it was kinder than it might have been. And that was enough. 6 months after the night everything changed, Lucia Vega paused outside the boardroom doors, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. The woman staring back still looked like her. Same dark eyes, same calm mouth, but the weight she carried had shifted. It was no longer the burden of invisibility. It was responsibility. Inside, voices murmured, papers shuffled, chairs scraped softly across the polished floor. Once, those sounds had belonged to a world that excluded her. Now they marked a space where her presence mattered. Lucia adjusted the folder in her hands, feeling the familiar reassurance of the jade pen resting against her palm, and stepped inside. The room rose to greet her. Board members stood without being prompted, a gesture that still surprised her no matter how many times it happened. "Good morning," she said, first in English, then Spanish, then Mandarin, the words flowing easily, naturally. Heads nodded. Smiles followed. 6 months earlier, she had been wiping fingerprints from this very table, absorbing conversations never meant for her. Today, she was here to lead them. She took her seat and glanced briefly at the framed photograph on the far credenza. Her father, younger than she remembered him now, caught mid-laugh in an old snapshot from his early days at Reeves Enterprises. Rafael Vega had believed in preparation, in quiet excellence, in bridges built word by word. Lucia inhaled and began. Her presentation unfolded with clarity and precision. Market expansion strategies grounded in cultural nuance. Labor retention models informed by first-hand experience. Numbers that spoke the board's native language. Profit margins, growth percentages, reduced turnover, interwoven with the human cost those numbers often obscured. Since the Hangtech partnership, Asian market share had grown 32%. Employee retention was up 24%. The room listened, rapt, not because Lucia demanded attention, but because she had earned it. She spoke without bravado, her confidence measured, grounded. When she referenced workforce protections, she didn't moralize. She explained risk mitigation, long-term stability, brand trust, the arithmetic of fairness. Victor Reeves watched her closely from the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He had not changed, not really. Profit still drove him, but Profit had learned a new dialect, one Lucia spoke fluently. Outside the boardroom, the company was changing in ways few analysts noticed but many employees felt. Lucia's first official directive as director had been the creation of the Rafael Vega Scholarship Fund, open to the children of maintenance, security, and support staff, students whose talents were often buried beneath survival. Her second had been the Hidden Talents Initiative, a quiet but radical program encouraging employees at every level to disclose skills, education, and experience beyond their job descriptions. The results had been startling. A night security guard with an engineering degree from Nigeria now worked in product development. A cafeteria worker fluent in 5 languages joined the international logistics team. An IT help desk technician with an eye for design now sat in on early-stage product meetings. Lucia didn't frame it as charity. She framed it as efficiency. Untapped talent was wasted capital. Reeves understood that language perfectly. Lucia's own life had shifted just as profoundly. The eviction notice was gone, replaced by a lease for a modest 2-bedroom apartment near her mother's rehabilitation center. Min Vega's health had stabilized, her physical therapy progressing faster than doctors expected. In the afternoons, Min took online courses to refresh her engineering credentials, her mind as sharp as ever. Sometimes Lucia would catch her mother studying schematics at the kitchen table, determination etched into her features, and feel a quiet swell of pride. The hospital bills were under control. The debt shrinking. For the first time since her father's death, the future felt negotiable rather than foreclosed. Lucia's office reflected her journey without announcing it loudly. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city that had once swallowed her whole. The desk was solid walnut, smooth beneath her fingertips. On one corner sat the jade pen, resting in a small crystal stand, its surface catching the light. Nearby, a framed photo of her parents on their wedding day, Min radiant, Raphael grinning as if the world were already generous. Fresh orchids filled the room with a clean, living scent that mingled faintly with the sandalwood memory the pen always carried. Past and present coexisted here, not as contradiction, but as continuity. The business press loved her story. Headlines framed her rise as improbable, inspirational, disruptive. Analysts praised Reeves Enterprises for discovering hidden talent within its own ranks, calling it an innovative approach to diversity. Lucia read the articles with a practiced neutrality. They never quite captured the cost of invisibility, the exhaustion, the calculations made at 3 in the morning over eviction notices and medical bills. They didn't mention the dozens of others who had been overlooked for years. But they did mention Rafael Vega. That mattered. One clipping, framed beside her father's photo, read, Reeves Enterprises stock soars on Asian partnership, new director credits immigrant father's legacy. Lucia smiled every time she passed it, not because of the praise, but because his name was no longer a footnote. Derek Willis, meanwhile, had vanished from the corporate world with remarkable speed. After the security footage and internal investigation became impossible to ignore, his reputation collapsed. No major firm would touch him. The last Lucia heard, he was teaching business communication at a community college. The irony was sharp but unindulged. Lucia did not take pleasure in his fall. She simply refused to carry it. Reeves himself remained much the same, calculating, exacting, unapologetically driven by results. He referred to Lucia's ascent as lightning in a bottle, a phrase that neatly avoided acknowledging the systems that had kept her hidden. But his actions spoke louder than his metaphors. Hiring practices shifted, promotion pathways widened, language access improved, not out of moral awakening, perhaps, but because it worked. And working systems save lives quietly, without needing belief. As Lucia concluded her presentation, the board approved her expansion plan unanimously. 450 new jobs projected. 18% valuation growth anticipated. She closed her folder and rose. Applause followed, measured, professional, sincere. As the meeting adjourned, employees greeted her in the hallway. Some in English, others in Spanish or Mandarin. Each greeting felt like a small bridge, built and crossed in the same moment. Back in her office, her assistant knocked softly. Your mother's physical therapist called, she said. Improvements are ahead of schedule. Gracias, Lucia replied, savoring the ease with which she spoke now, no longer editing herself for survival. Her calendar chimed, a reminder of another meeting, another chance to shape the company's direction. She picked up the jade pen, rolling it once between her fingers. It was no longer a secret. It was a symbol, not of exceptionalism, but of preparation meeting opportunity at last. Lucia paused by the window, looking out over the city. She thought of the cleaning staff who now walked these halls with their heads a little higher. Of her mother, rebuilding a life interrupted but not erased. Of her father, whose lessons had carried her across an invisible line. Visibility had its price. Scrutiny, pressure, expectation, but invisibility had cost far more. Talent wasted, futures delayed, bridges left unbuilt. She turned back to her desk, to her work, to the future unfolding not by miracle, but by choice. Words still built bridges, and Lucia Vega intended to keep building. 6 weeks into the conversion, everything unraveled at once. Legal fees ballooned past estimates, climbing 40% higher than projected. 2 early donors backed out quietly, citing concerns about leadership stability after learning about Margaret's Parkinson's. A city inspector flagged multiple code violations that hadn't surfaced in years, repairs totaling $15,000 they didn't have. And the calendar crept closer to March, to the deadline Richard had made painfully clear. Terrence stood alone in the center one late February morning, violation notices spread across a stainless steel table like bad omens. Outside, snow drifted lazily, indifferent. Inside, the building felt heavier than it had weeks earlier, weighed down by the truth Terrence was struggling to accept. Margaret sat nearby, her cast recently removed, fingers weak, tremor sharper from stress. "I'm sorry," Terrence said quietly. "I thought I could make this work." "You did make it work," she replied. "For a while. That matters." Richard arrived soon after, folder in hand, expression set. "We need to talk." He laid out new offers. Higher than before. Faster closing. Developers ready to move. Margaret listened, shoulders slumped, exhaustion finally winning. "Maybe it's time," she said softly. "Maybe I've been holding on too long." Terrence felt something break inside him. Not anger, failure, the sharp knowledge that his hope might have cost her more than it gave. After she left, Richard turned to Terrence. "This is what I warned you about. Giving her hope when there was none." "I know," Terrence said. "I know." That night, a call came from Denise Foster, a community organizer Terrence had spoken with weeks earlier. "There's an emergency grant," she said. "The McKnight Foundation, Culinary Equity Programs. The deadline's close, but it's real money." Terrence stared around the empty center. Old approach. Wrong frame. He opened his laptop. 3 days later, he stood before Margaret and Richard with something new. "Not preservation," he said. "Transformation." The proposal reimagined everything. A culinary pipeline for underserved students. Equipment provided. Mentorship built in. Career pathways, not nostalgia. A living legacy. The Thomas Sullivan Culinary Training Initiative. Richard studied the plan carefully. "This is solid. But the timeline." "I know," Terrence said. "But if we don't try, we lose everything anyway." Margaret watched her son. "What do you think, Richard?" He exhaled slowly. "If we do this, we do it right." 4 days blurred into one. Lawyers, accountants, letters of support, community partners rallied. Richard mobilized his company's resources. Terrence worked until his eyes burned. Margaret provided history and heart. At 11:47 p.m., they submitted the application. They sat back in silence. Regardless of the outcome, something had shifted. Richard admitted the truth he'd buried for years. "I wasn't angry at my parents for caring. I was angry because I thought they cared more about everyone else than me." "And now?" Terrence asked. "Now I think I finally understand them." Weeks passed. Spring crept into Minneapolis quietly, as it always did. Then the email arrived. Approved. Not the full amount. Enough. Richard matched it personally. The building was brought up to code. Kitchens were refreshed. Purpose replaced panic. On a warm May afternoon, Terrence stood inside the newly named Thomas Sullivan Culinary Training Center as the first cohort arrived. 40 students. Nervous. Hopeful. Real. Margaret stood beside him, slower now, but steady. "Thomas would have loved this," she said. Richard arrived with his children. Madison lingered at the knife displays. Ethan watched a demonstration. "You're the guy from Hennepin," Ethan said. "The street cook." Terrence smiled. "Sometimes." Margaret addressed the families. "Cooking is dignity," she said. "This place exists so your children can imagine more." Terrence told his story. Not polished. Honest. Survival. Loss. Cooking is connection. Afterward, Richard watched his children laugh together over techniques he once resented. "This," he said quietly, "is the best thing I've ever built." That evening, Richard stopped Terrence at the door. "The board meets next week. I'm recommending you as executive director." Terrence hesitated. "I don't have the credentials." "You have the trust." They shook hands. Later that night, Terrence returned to his old corner. He cooked with Thomas's knives, not for money, but for meaning. When people tried to pay, he pointed them toward the center. "This matters," he said. "That's where your money should go." As the city lights flickered on, Terrence packed up and walked home to his apartment. A real one. Stable. Earned. His phone buzzed. A message from Jasmine. She'd been accepted into a culinary therapy program. "You inspired me," she wrote. Terrence paused, breath catching. Some lives change slowly, others pivot on a single frozen afternoon. On a choice to kneel in the snow. To stay. To help. Spring settled over Minneapolis, forgiving winter at last. And Terrence Hayes kept showing up. One meal. One student. One act of care at a time.